Today, we're going to be talking about what happens with business owners and unplanned business exits. C Suite Support is a company of fractional CFOs, controllers, and accountants, and we work with companies helping them through transition, either in buying or selling, as well as getting their financials ready for banks, etc. So that's our normal situation that we do. But through that, we have a council with C Suite Network to try to help leaders of companies. And we do that as servant leadership. So anyone that wants to come in and have a consultation or whatever about their company, either in ongoing or in the area of exit planning, please contact us through C Suite Network. Today, we're honored to have a guest by the name of Russ Ray. He is principal with R Squared Advisors, and they work in many areas of financial planning and advising. But one of the major areas that he specializes in is exit planning, business exits, and what to do. And the first hook line of the day is: did you know that over 50% of business exits are unplanned? And then a year later, 70% of the business owners report that they regret having sold their business. We're going to talk about how you can make sure that this will not apply to you and your business in trying to move forward. So, with that, Russ Ray, would you give us a little background here and tell us what you do and why you're better than everybody else at this?
Oh my goodness. So my name's Russ Ray, and I do operate. My shingle is R Squared Advisors. That's a part of Ameriprise Financial, and I do carry something called a certified exit planning advisor designation, which is to sort of focus on the issue that we do work with businesses and we plan for a successful exit versus what might be an accidental or unintentional exit, for example. And I always think about where it goes back to. I was a military officer and I did some pretty hard time in that. And some of the things that you learned in the military had to do with, surviving and handling obstacles. And like when the crap hits the fan, what are you going to do? Business is very much just like that, right? So what we do is we are a financial planning and a wealth management company. And for business owners, the big thing that they own and the most important part is their business. And a successful exit much of the time dictates whether their own financial plan will be a success or something less than the success they imagined. So that's what I do.
All right, let's talk about exit planning. When we interview a potential new client, every time one of the comments I make is your company is for sale, which usually gets a response, no, it's not. I said, no, let's talk about that. It's for sale. If not today, a year from today, 5 years from today, or when you get in your car today and an event happens to where you don't make it home. Now your company is the estate for your family, your legacy, and you don't have control. So if you don't run your company like it's for sale every day, you are possibly going to have a problem. But more importantly, if you run it like it's for sale every day, you're going to make sure your profitability is maximum. Your revenue is growing at the best rate it can that you're aware of and can do. So let's talk about running your company like it's for sale every day you're in business. So, what exactly is an exit strategy, Russ? What would you say is important to the owners and why they really should have one?
Okay, so really, it's the phrase exit planning. The thing to remember is it's not something you do at the end. It's something you do closer to the beginning, but certainly all along the way, as you referenced. So, exit planning, in my view, is it's really it's a business strategy, right? It's what you're doing every day, every month, every quarter, every year as part of where you're going as a business. Yes, you're right. Could your business be for sale every day? If something happens to you, around you, it can literally happen involuntarily. So the exit planning as a business strategy just simply means, so for example, if you engage us, we go through a set of filters where we tackle a problem. We work with a team of people, but we tackle problems and we measure those problems. And then we reconvene and we measure how we did with that problem. And let's say we use a 90-day process. We get to the end of the 90 days, and one of the key questions after we tackle particular issue is, yeah, how did we do on the issue? Did we improve it? Did we go backwards? But the bigger question is, okay, now that we've addressed that issue, are you ready to sell your business? In most cases, it's no, right? It could be, hey, my business isn't worth what I need it to be for my personal puzzle. But it also could be, you know, I'm having a lot of fun. I love what I do. I'm not ready to sell. But one of those iterations is likely to have a yes at some point. A loved one is terribly sick or something else, divorce, common issue. So the idea is it's a business strategy that's ongoing, almost like I've heard this before from accountants. Hey, if you're going to buy a rent house, think about how you're going to get out of that rent house before you ever buy it. Business is much like that. We need to be thinking how we're going to sell it successfully while we're running it, and maybe even in our design when we decide to go into business in the first place.
Yeah, well, I would say that going into business is similar to, not same, but similar to getting married, with one exception. You don't go into a marriage trying to figure out how to get out of it. You go into a marriage and trying to figure out how to make it work, or
So true.
wanting to make it work. Now, in a business, you want to make it work. You want to go through all of that. You want to build it. You want to build something that you're proud of, and you want it to do something more than just be a place to go every day. So, building that business and getting it ready for whatever it's going to be, for success, for sale, for legacy, whatever it's going to be, very important. And you touched upon it a minute ago, and I'm going to say this right now because, again, I go back to business owners we talk to. When do you think they ought to think about, ponder what's my exit strategy? When should they do that?
Just before this podcast started, we should have already been talking about it, is the answer. Right. So, one of the things we've learned is that, things you're not expecting to hit you will hit you. So if you're ready, or at least if you've prepared to the greatest extent you can prepare, you're more ready than you could be, or you might have been. Right. So, a common thing we think of the ugly D's, right? Like, hey, you could die, death. Divorce is a hammer to a business, a disability. There's also, when there's multiple owners, think about how impactful disagreement is. And then there are words like disruption. It could be cyber attack in today's world. It could be tariffs. Like there's lots of topics that can mess with your business. And so we think of that sort of just anything that rhymes with the letter D. We usually think that's what could mess you up. But we also know this: just because those things don't mess you up, if you're planning all along the way, we know even that successful exit sometimes is subject to interpretation because, and again, this is not me telling you this, these are surveys of business owners that have sold or exited their business, and greater than 2/3, 70+%, in fact, claim that they regret it. They wish they hadn't sold. They wish they hadn't exited. So we know having a successful exit from your business, it's multifaceted, and it's kind of like what's the old turducken, one thing wrapped in another, right? So if you want to be successful, we need to be planning. Paul, a lot of times this is 3, it's 5, it's 7 years, sometimes all along the path to be ready, because like you said, your business is for sale every day.
Let's talk a little bit about common mistakes that are out there. A lot of business owners, they have partnerships, or they have family in the business, or they have family they plan to bring into the business or leave the business to. And they've got two sons. They're going to leave the business to the two sons. One is active, one's inactive. Okay, what do you do? Things that you do, the business is worth $10 million. The sons love each other until they're going to split $10 million.
Right.
Okay. And partners, the buy sell agreements. If those buy sell agreements aren't properly done up front, simple little things can completely blow up the business at a later date. So why don't we touch on some of those things that should be addressed on the front side?
Yeah, I mean, if I think about what the true most important issues are, I would probably back up one step and say it's urgency to address it and it's communication while addressing it. So I would say those are the biggies. because, you know, it makes sense. Hey, I could do that later. Hey, I could do that later. Both of my sons are going to come into the business and I'm going to, you know, I'm going to have them both do it. Well, who's going to make the final decisions when there's a contentious, you know, issue? Like, who's the actual decision maker, right? Well, where let's say the parent is still operating the business and the sons are trying to learn the business, it's not quite as critical because that parent can be that decision maker. But as you hand over those reins, boy, that can be contentious,
It can
right?
be. I just watched the movie Secretariat. If you've watched that movie, you know the father becomes ill, and
Okay.
the brother and the sister have different opinions on what they're going to do about this little horse that's outside the door that could pay off all the bills, named Secretariat.
Right.
I don't know if you remember that scene where the brother comes in with her husband and tells them, "We have no choice. We've got to sell it." And she calls in the secretary who explains to them, says, "No, she takes care of the horses and you can take care of the property." And then he says he's going to sue her, you know, and
Yeah.
I'll testify to that in court. Well, those things need to be taken care of because they truly exist. I mean, I know you've been there. We've seen it. When money gets in the way or emotions get in the way, businesses don't pass very well when that's not properly addressed on the front side. So, moving from there, talking about just how do you do that briefly, and then let's talk into some of the common mistakes that they get into.
Sure. I think an example, let's just kind of roll with this sibling idea. You know, there could be a sibling that's materially in the business every day, and, you know, maybe the owning parent thinks, you know, they're 100% in, but here's my other sibling, you know, they need to get something out of this too. And so sometimes you know, the one that started the business may say, hey, I'm going to just kind of include them and make sure they get some money out of this deal, but I'm really talking with the main sibling on the planning. And when they find out that these plans are being formulated without their inclusion, let me just say that is might as well be a bomb that's about to go up. It doesn't matter about the money, it's the inclusion. And so that's that second component. Beyond urgency, it really is communication. Now, it doesn't mean you have to, but it means that we should be discussing the implications of including them and not including them in the discussion. Because, you know, a lot of times if you're trying to orchestrate a sale, you might not even be including that first sibling at all, and you're trying to pull it all off, you know, quote unquote, for their benefit. You're going to orchestrate this wonderful sale. Well, let's say you included that involved sibling. Hey, you're going to work inside the company for 3 years, right? And as we do a warm handoff to make sure the business remains a success, they might not be in agreement with that, right? Their life's about to change. So I do believe the discussion when we do exit planning has to include the communication part, and it's big. So a board type of an approach. I actually have one tomorrow, and we're meeting with the two parents, and we're meeting with the two intended sons as owners, but not only them, we're meeting with their spouses as well. And we're beginning a series of 5 meetings across 2025, specifically to orchestrate with full communication how we're going to do this. So I would say it doesn't mean they all have to work that way, but in this case, the communication lines are wide, wide open. Because even if you think, hey, my sons work here, it might not be the whole story. Remember, they may have given up all of their other hopes and aspirations of what they might be, an attorney or something else, and they're in, you know, in your business, and they're devoting their future and their spouse's future to this business. So they're all in, you know, not a penny, a dollar. Right? So I think that communication allows that to be a successful journey and a successful outcome in everybody's eyes. And one daughter-in-law doesn't resent the other daughter-in-law, and so forth, year
Uh,
after year.
I
So,
think following on with that, let's talk briefly on things that kind of are complements to this discussion, and that is the factor that there may be other assets, there may be other situations. When a company or when an individual is going to sell a company, there's things to consider like tax implications, Should this go into a trust? Should it be an irrevocable trust? Should it be something to where if the size of it is big enough that you eliminate double taxation? All of those
Hmm.
things have to be done, and they've got to be done at least a year before the process occurs, or it's negated. So, trying to get into those things first, they need an advisor, and that's one of the things you do, and we do, is when we get into those situations to where we're aware this is what they want to do, we it's not in our wheelhouse. So we bring in people like yourself that it is in your wheelhouse to look at what is, do they have a trust? I just went through that, the guy saying, well, if you don't bring, name every child in there, I have two children that are well in their 50s. All right. So they don't have quite the needs of the ones that are younger that have young kids. And he said, well, if you don't mention them, they could come in and try to bust the trust. So mention them. Tell them, okay, these are my children, and this is what I'm giving or not giving. And if I'm not giving, this is the reason. Put something in there that identifies what they need. So that's a simple little thing. But the
That
other
is, I like that.
is the trust factor of setting it into a trust, moving it into a trust to avoid double taxation from a state if it's large enough to hit estate taxes along with the taxation of the sale. So moving from there, how does touch upon that briefly, if you would, and then let's go into how to determine the value of a company.
Fair enough. Yeah, Paul, I actually think you alluded to the key component on this. When we're doing exit planning, the trick is I am not a tax expert and I'm not a legal expert. And you don't want me going to find your buyer. That's a business broker. That's their role. If we're a more expensive business, yes, we've got M&A consultants to bring in and private equity and things like that. But really, just think of it. It's a bench, a collaborative approach. So I could not execute a plan without pulling in the experts and your guys in your role, or either an attorney or a team of attorneys. Sometimes it's both an estate attorney and a business attorney that's needed. I think that's probably the thing to remember. It's a bench approach. I even have a lady that's we're trying to put together a line item in a contract for her, and she's a conflict resolution expert. Like, so, another, like, I wish conflict resolution could rhyme with D so I could put it in my stack of D's. But just think disagreement, right? But it is totally bringing the team together and having various parts of the team execute their roles in this particular thing. And I think of your taxation issue almost as, what are the expectations on the business in terms of sort of where are we going? Are we thinking an exponential curve of growth? Are we, more of a single digit compounding type of growth that's possible? Because remember, if we think about who owns the business and we're transitioning the business to somebody else, if we got a highly appreciating asset that we're going to own a piece of, we need to at least consider whether it's a trust or some sort of LP or some sort of limited liability vehicle. Even the idea is, like, if we're going to have wild appreciation, it might mean material to us to have that occur outside of our names, inside another entity. Of course, the trust is one of those. And the idea is, if something's going to go from 25 million to 100 million, we actually have estate taxes to think about, right? And if that's going to happen, let's get at least a portion outside of our names. And then, of course, really what you're dealing with when you start thinking about that is, oh goodness, wait a minute, what about control, right? I still need some way to control a part of this destiny. And if I give up too much trying to save taxes, I may be, it may not work for me anymore. So I would think it's control versus tax. And of course, we have to plan out what we think is going to happen. At the end of the day, we're transferring it to either our family or our business team, or we're transferring it to a third party. And what do they see as the value? That's what this is all about. We got to have a buyer, or we've got nowhere to go. Anyway.
I was sitting in a meeting yesterday at lunch with a company that does the evaluations and does seek buyers for companies. And you're talking about someone who designs semiconductor chips. Okay. Well,
Right.
obviously, there's a change in the wind here where semiconductors are coming back to the U.S. That company that has reasonable volume now could explode in value. Okay, don't know that they've got to perform, but they already
Right.
have a very nice business, and they're trying to get on the front side of the U.S. production or increase in production of semiconductors chips.
Okay.
So they don't build them, but they design them. Well, that's kind of a tricky little business. So we're talking about what they need to do for their state, what they need to do as far as getting their trust set up, their IP set up, things of that nature to protect themselves. So for me, a very interesting conversation. I learned a lot in that conversation, but you have to delve into all of the pieces that they know. And then you say, okay, we need a trust attorney for this. We need a business attorney for this. We need an evaluation for that. And then once we've got all that done, now let's go out and find the buyer for this company. First thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to go out and get industry averages, industry benchmarks. What's happened with companies like this, even if it's a minor amount, are
Mm-hmm.
they selling, and we did that. And it's like the last ones that were on transactional, they were looking at like a 7 multiple. But the very last one that sold was at a 3. Okay. Why?
That's yeah.
Okay. So there's so many variables in there and trying to determine this value. You need an expert to help you get there. And here's the last piece of that. If you're sitting at a 3, what do you need to do to be at a 6 or 7? If you're going to continue to grow that business, what are the steps you need to do to build that business the right way to get it to a 6 or 7? So that's I guess one of the things of the psychological aspect that you have to get involved in. And where we come in is okay, every time we can do something to help the EBITDA, the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, for those that don't know, for every $100,000, that means a multiple. If it's transactional, that's going to be a $300,000 to $400,000 increase in value to the owner. If it's tech driven, that may be 700 or 800,000. If it's SaaS, software sold as a service, that's going to be $1.2 million to $1.4 million. So how do you turn a business that's transactional into tech driven? And how do you take a tech driven business and turn it into a SaaS business? You start looking at those options in that direction. Let's talk about the psychological aspect of trying to get someone looking at their business. What do they need to do the business, and pursuing what can they do to improve their business value?
So really, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. So there's a quantitative aspect to that multiple. And there's also a quantitative, I should have said qualitative aspect to it as well. Okay, so the qualitative is the interpretation of various variables that impact that multiple. So I'll use a simple one. I mean, we know cash flow, we have a balance sheet, we have those numbers, right? We have what might be the standard industry multiple. Why does one company that seems just like this one, uh, how do they get a 7 out of the market when another one only gets a 3? And a lot of times it's what's hidden inside the company that's not quite as obvious. I would say one of the biggest ones is preparedness to be sold, kind of like that mentality you mentioned. Every day your business is for sale, but if you're not prepared, you suppress that multiple, you suppress what it's actually worth. I like to use various measurements that don't have an average, they don't have a middle. You got to pick qualitatively. Am I below average? Right, self perception, of course. But am I below average or am I above average? That forces us not to assume the middle, right? And so if I'm below average, I know I've got a lot of work to do on this particular variable, right? So I think we've got to take qualitative and add it to the quantitative to bend bend what the possibilities are for this company. If it's the sales team and whoever started the business because of relationships just happens to be the lead on getting new business, getting new relationships, even if they're not all of it. Let's just say they're the 40 or 50%. It's very dangerous for a buyer to come in and overpay on multiple to acquire that business, and then that proprietor, they exit, or they, ease out the door over a couple of years, and now all of a sudden they're left with, frankly, sales that don't recur, sales that can't, spawn new relationships seemingly out of nowhere. They just don't work anymore. So that drives what that multiple interpretation should be, and that's qualitative, right? Other things, I would say, oftentimes when we think about multiple, just a massive amount of the possible attainable multiple is not obvious. It might literally be intellectual property, right? Intellectual property might be, hey, what does this company know that somebody else hasn't figured out? What processes have they stumbled upon or created and are refining that are not obvious to somebody else? And that's worth something, but it's only worth something if you can put it in a position to be acquired. If you can put that specialized process or specialized knowledge or even people, if you can put that in a position where it can be monetized, now you're talking, 5 and 10 times as much money when you sell. So again, put that in hundreds of thousands or millions, and it can be everything. It can literally be everything.
Absolutely. Just to clarify for some of the listeners here, one of the factors you spoke of is the Switzerland effect. Can it stand on its own? Does it need help from all of its neighbors? If that company, without the owner, can continue and not miss a beat, it's going to be worth probably 50 to 100% more than if that company does have an owner that's very intricately involved and very important to the company. It just, if the owner passes away the first month that they buy it, what do? So they've got to put that in perspective. That's where we try to encourage, and I know you do as well. And this is part of this getting it in. Start doing your succession plan. Start building out your team to where they can take over every aspect that you do, to where you can go on a 2-month hiatus and the company doesn't miss a beat. Jason has been working with a company that the owner literally is planning a 2-month hiatus to where he refuses, or he plans to refuse to take emails or phone calls from anybody at the company to prove the value of the company. Now, he's not crazy enough to where he's just going to leave it that way. So the discussion is, and has been throughout its entirety of this discussion, is that he's going to have someone, in this particular case, Jason, be the point that would come in if that company has an issue that they have to have resolved by the owner. They contact Jason, and Jason's going to make a determination of whether this can be done internally and go ahead and do it, or yeah, we've got to get a hold of the owner. Example, you got to have a document signed that only the owner can sign. Sure, he's got to do that. But if it's making a decision on hiring this person or that person, then we have the expertise to do that. And since we are involved in recruiting, things of that nature, it allows Jason to look at it from that perspective. So let's talk about some of the challenges you've seen in your career. What has happened when things went wrong?
Oh goodness, where to start on that? I mean, things pop into my brain. One, I have one that was supposed to close in 2024. Not a giant business, but a business that that I was worried about him because he's used to being kind of a big guy in his community. Seen as a big guy. He's affluent, calls his own shots. Uh, you know, but he was going to sell, and I was concerned that he was willing to sell for too little rather than spend the time to develop the business into a bigger multiple. So we talked about it. But what went wrong, interestingly enough, was he got his feelings hurt. And we have to remember, you're wrapped into your business a lot of times. Your ego, your self image, really every part of you is wrapped to that business. And as we were finalizing the figures, the buyer asked about this debt that the seller didn't disclose. The seller just felt it was a personal debt, didn't have anything to do with the business. But when he asked about it, he took it as an offense to his integrity. So that deal blew up. It really wasn't. That's personal, has nothing to do with the business. I mean, even though that's the answer, that wasn't really what happened. He asked about my integrity, and I'm not selling to somebody that doesn't respect my integrity. And so that's just a simple little thing that can spoil a whole deal, right? So I mean, those are the kind of things that can go wrong because that's why 70% are not happy. They literally profoundly regret that they left their business a year later. That's why
You
we get that. It's
you
because it's them.
you pointed out something that I think needs to be added to this thought line here, and that is a lot of companies attempt to do this on their own or attempt to do it with advisors, but not necessarily with someone managing the sale. And that's where we have companies. I've done it. We have companies with the meeting yesterday. They are a buy side or a sell side advisor. Where that's important is if that buyer had asked the question of the advisor could have gotten a simple answer, gone back and resolved it to where there was never a personal thing that happened. So
Right.
many times, keeping the two parties a little bit separated to where personalities don't drive the meeting, don't drive the conversation, or don't drive emotions can be extremely important. Excuse me for that. So I put that in there that companies should use you directly or use companies like ours or buy side advisors. And the
Right.
company we met with yesterday was wise enough. They think this is going to be big enough. They're trying to get all of their ducks in a row. Quote spread. Sometimes we don't even know where our ducks are. We might find out that there's a goose in there. But reality is we do need to get them in a row. We got to know what we're doing. So they came to us for CFO. But one of the things they ask for is do you recommend a buy side advisor? Right off the bat, I know I've got somebody that has some pretty good savvy about what they think they're going to run into. So we brought in a buy side advisor in the meeting yesterday. The buy side advisor has extensive background in plates in building these wafers, building
Right.
into the technology industry. So they were able to talk apples and apples very quickly. And our potential client in this deal immediately felt comfortable and just started sharing all the aspects that we needed to deal with. So that's not all buy side advisors can do that. We work with probably four, but you want to get somebody to get the right person matching up with the right company. You get all the slavels in place to where they're the syllables are there, and you're going to have a good team. And that's what your job is, from what I see, is getting that good team in place. That's what our job
Agreed.
is. That's why we come to you. We want to get the right people in place that match up for the process and have the bling factor. We can sit there at that.
Yeah, actually, I have a similar experience with a sell side specialist just months ago, and I'm like, after the interactions, I'm like, why don't I have you introduce me every time? Because all you did was talk about me and how important I am, but really, you're critical as a sell side advisor. This was in an industrial space, but you're precisely correct. It is that team approach. Pull the buyer and the selling parties apart just a little bit and insulate them from just the risk of a hurt feeling, risk of an insult that really wasn't, but could be interpreted that way. I agree with you 100%. It is a team approach.
Absolutely. They need to pat themselves on the back when the checks are signed.
That's right. And,
Everybody in the
and
room,
really,
everybody, the buyer's just bought what he thinks is a gem, and the seller just sold what he thinks was a diamond. So that's when you get
there you go.
there. All right. Well, let's kind of move into what are the top three pieces of advice you would give a business owner who's starting to think about exiting? They didn't do it a year ago. They didn't do it when they started their business. What do you tell them now if the sub? Now, first off, I'm going to say I'm assuming every person you ever talk to, you tell them your company's for sale. But if they come to you and they're just now asking you, what are the three top pieces of advice you would give them?
Okay, yeah, that's good. I think of a few. So I might back up and say, my experience with owners is that they have this idea. They've tried to encapsulate in their brains what their business is worth. They have this idea that often I think they're not even in the right time zone of what their business is worth. Yeah, sometimes they think it's worth a whole lot more than it really is. Every once in a while, it is the opposite, and they don't see the potential of that giant multiple of a cleaned up business. I mean, they may have, gosh, paid their kids' tuition through the business and be driving their fancy car and writing it off through the business, things like that, right? So there's a lot of cleanup. If we have some years, we can clean it up. So I'd say the first one is telling yourself something that may or may not be true, that a panel of experts working for you could clean that up and help you be clear on what you really got. So that's one. The second, I would say, just is the simple urgency. Urgency is everything in this. So I can tell them, hey, your business is for sale today as I show up in your office, right? But if you don't adopt that urgency, we can't get anything done. We need to be running in 90-day sprints, seeing how we did. What did we clean up? Are you ready to sell? No, great. Tackle the next issue, build a team, etc. Right? So I would say, to me, those are the critical ones. It's self-delusion, it's urgency, and then lastly, I actually do think it's communication. Right? When you begin to work this notion of where I'm going, I don't think you keep that a secret. I mean, you have to keep it a secret from the people that work for you that might decide to leave if, for example, they know you're thinking about putting the company on the market, right? You don't want your team to disassemble while you're trying to sell the team. But you do need to think about the material parties, usually family or other parties in the ownership team. You need to be communicating your thoughts and be open to their thoughts on how to orchestrate a successful journey to where you want to go. And communicating just insulates you from hurting them. What's a nice way to say that? Making them really, really mad to where it harms the business, those kind of things. Critical people leave and take your team with them, those type of really, really destructive issues.
Totally understand and personal experience. So I can appreciate that comment in its entirety. Well, one of the things, and I want to point this out, rumor has it that you were a Client Experience Award for 2024 for taking care of your clients. So share what that means and what it did for you and what it does for you when we recommend you into a client.
Well, that's very insightful for you to notice that. So thank you very much. Yeah, so we have metrics that we create within the practice, response time, contacts per year that we simply track that stuff in software. And we do third-party surveys to the client base, really so that we can get unbiased, undoctored, cold hard truths. I remember someone gave me a 4 out of 5 on something that I thought was my dearest client. Honestly, it hurt my feelings, right? I'm like, wow, you gave me a 4 out of 5 on something. So you really do get material information from those types of processes operating external to the conversations you're already having with your client. So all that was a recognition of some metrics that we created to sort of just rank, did we do a superlative job? Did we do a good job? Did we do an average job? So fortunate for us, we came out as superlative, but that's what's behind that Client Experience Award. Thank you for asking.
You bet, you bet. And I love Client Experience Awards that are five. So on a 1 to 5 scale, let's put it that way. I better put that in there quick. So I've got a recent client that had a CFO in their business, fractional CFO, for 3 years, and I took that as a new client to me in January, and 2 weeks ago they said, you have given me more insight to my business, more understanding of what I need to do in 2 months than what I got over the last 3 years. Yes, I think I made the right decision. Okay. So you never know, but at the same time, you should go out and ask. You should canvas
Right.
your clients. We should canvas all of our clients, our business, making sure that what we think is happening is really happening. One of my old sayings, when
Yeah.
I ran a business, and at one time I did run a $180 million revenue business. And my saying was, there's three ways things are done: the way the guy out in the warehouse is doing it, the way his manager thinks it's being done, and the way the business owner thinks it's done. And they're usually never anywhere close. So that
Fair.
being said, I want to bring this around.
It's
And
so
Tricia, I'd like to
interesting.
bring
I've
you
been
in,
taking
if I
notes
could,
off
into
on the side
conversation
here
and let
because
you
I
ask
am an
Russ some
owner
questions,
in our
because you
business
have to
and
think
obviously
about
the
these things
CEO, so
yourself.
mindful to,
Hmm.
what exits look like. And I guess the main question I would have related to that, and I'll come back to that in a second. But um, so I'm sitting in the seat. I'm also working with and advising hundreds, thousands, if you look at whole reach, millions in terms of the whole of C-suite network that sit in this exact predicament in terms of building their businesses. What does it all look like? And then, of course, we have the inevitability of our demise, or or a better ending, a better place to go, whatever our belief systems are. But so there's this constant sort of dynamic of what is happening with that, and the exit isn't necessarily a flat out selling of the business. There's also investment dollars that you're taking in and the different stages of taking in investment money against the business that you're building. And so I'm curious what you recommend, or the different scenarios where these are really positive steps as you're scaling a very large business that has multiple shareholders, et cetera, or maybe even going public at some point, that kind of scenario, versus a small business that you can parcel off and either pass on to the next generation or sell holistically.
Yeah, I really think it comes down to the owners and what their personal goals are. It's almost like you said, however you see the final demise and where we go, or where we do not go, right? So we want to figure out, where do I want to go, right? So if I'd like to transfer it to family, that's one goal. If I'd like to find a buyer and make my business a monetary event specifically for me, rather than, yeah, it's part of my other plan for it to be a monetary, maybe that's our main goal, right? So we groom it and we sell it. Maybe that person is a serial entrepreneur, right? And like, I want to do this, grow it to the max, sell it, go do it again, because I just love the journey, right? And then there's the bigger thing. I want to, all I really care about is taking this thing public, making it last longer than I last. It's a story that goes on and on and on. And not only that, I take care of all the rank and file that depend on me and my team for their livelihoods, right? It can be even more complicated than that. Sometimes we do this for tax reasons, but I mean, we could create a company that's owned by the employees as the transfer. And while that's tax favored, it's also, if you think about it, you're taking people that might not have the wherewithal or the foresight to save and compound, and you're creating a vehicle where they literally materially benefit from what you created over your working years, and you make the company
it's
go on
it's
forever, which is a
interesting to me
legacy that,
that
for a lot of the ego-driven
ego,
owners, just think that's
and you
pretty
mentioned
rewarding.
feelings
So
earlier,
I
and the
I think that
tension
would be
between
my first
family
effort to
members and
answer your
so
question.
on. When you look at people through these challenges, what do you find the biggest pitfalls are, and how does ego work to the good versus working to the bad in terms of successful outcomes that you've seen?
Yeah, so to the bad is easy. It could be a deal that gets messed up because someone got their feeling hurt. Their feelings hurt. That's bad. Another thing can be, hey, I know what my business is worth, and I think it is the surgeon syndrome. Hey, I can't take guidance from other people. I am practically God in my own brain. And so, like with business owners, we do get some that can't be told anything or counseled towards anything. And, Paul, this is a team approach. That person has to be coachable, right?
Yeah.
So I would say on the negative side, if they're not coachable, this is a very, very difficult journey. In fact, I um, don't easily quote fees because I need to know those people and what I'm up against in terms of what I'm going to charge. Because one group of parties is easy to work with and is coachable, and one is not, and it's a grind and it's hard and it's unpleasant sometimes, right? So there's that. Now on the good side, that ego, think of it, needs a home. So a lot of exit planning from my perspective is I've got this big ego. This big ego hatched this beautiful thing that we're going to sell. That's so rewarding to all the parties. Gave them so many choices in life. But that big ego has to find a new home if I'm going to exit. If I'm not going to regret that I sold my business, I have to work with them to groom what in the world are you going to do with 60 hours a week if you sell? What are you going to do with that? It's going to be an emptiness like you've never felt, right? So we've got to begin to groom them for what they imagine, what their ego, their psyche, what do they imagine their new footprint on planet Earth is going to be. And we've got to slowly get them there so that when they're ready to sell and we
That's
have a deal,
fascinating.
it is not the
I was
worst
working
thing
with a
that they've ever
CEO
experienced.
recently
It's
who had to
literally,
turn
oh, how
down
fun.
an
I'm going to
ideal
do this now.
acquisition
I
offer
cannot wait.
because he
We got to
had
get there.
not
That does not
separated his
accidentally happen.
personal
That's a
brand from the
big part of
company.
this.
And that's something we've been very focused on in C-Suite Network is that we have a whole tool set where you can create your personal brand and have it very simply, very affordably running in the side or your marketing team using it, etc. But it keeps your personal brand separate from your business. And it's ironic that we frequently get caught in our own personal brand being completely tied to the business and not understanding it is a separate asset. It's not the business.